Good afternoon, and welcome to the final presentation of the ALCTS Annual 2013 Online Pre-Conference, Loan Agreements for Exhibit Materials. I'm Jessica Phillips, host of today's pre-conference. Today's presentation is A Case Study in Exhibition Loans, Northwestern University Library, with Sara Stigberg. Sara is the Acting Art Collection Public Services Librarian at Northwestern University Library. She holds a master's degree in Library and Information Science with a certificate in Special Collections from the University of Illinois and an MA in Art History from Tulane University. If you have any questions for the presenter, please type them into the question box on your screen and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, please note today's session will be recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. A copy of the slides will also be provided. You are invited to use the Twitter hashtag ALCTSCE to interact with other participants during the webinar. However, please continue to submit questions for the presenter using the question box on the screen, as neither the presenter nor the host will monitor Twitter during the presentation. Please note that there may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Sara.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? All right, here we go. Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm looking forward to talking with you all today about a case study in exhibition loans at Northwestern University Library. Here's a photo of me so you can see what I look like and not just listen to my disembodied voice. And so what I'll be doing today is presenting to you how we got started at Northwestern University Library with an exhibits loan program, what we did, how it works, and present some advice from our library perspective. We got started in 2011 when Northwestern University Library's Special Libraries Division, that's a mouthful, received a request for the loan of Le Bohème Poète de Montmartre, a portrait of Eric Satie from 1891 by Ramon Casas from the Réunion, excuse me, my French is not good, Réunion des Musées Nationaux et du Grand Palais des Champs-Élysées for exhibition in the exhibit titled Bohème. This exhibit ran September 12th through May 13th in Paris, and then in February through May 2013 in Madrid. The painting that you see on your right here is about 3 by 6 feet framed and normally hangs in the Eloise W. Martin Reading Room in Deering Library, where the art collection is located. Catalan artist Ramon Casas, 1866 to 1932, was a friend of Charles Deering, the Northwestern benefactor for whom Deering Library is named. The painting was donated to the library by the Deering family and has traveled the world to be included in major exhibitions, including Toulouse-Lautrec and Montmartre at the National Gallery of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago in 2005, Barcelona and Modernity at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2006 and 2007. Before this, though, Northwestern didn't have a formal program, policies, or forms for exhibition loans of our major items like this one. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And these policies that we've created deal with not only special collections works like this oil painting, but they're also meant to cover book and paper loans as well. So I'll start by walking you through what we did. I began by consulting various people within the library and on campus and creating a plan from there. I collaborated with a good number of people, and then we moved our plan forward to library administration for implementation. So as then administrative assistant for the Special Libraries Division, the coordination of this project fell to me. I first consulted with our special collections curator, and his position has historically been in charge of exhibition loans like this one. I discovered, though, that there were no formal procedures, policies, or paperwork in place. So having interned at the New Orleans Museum of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago, this made me a little bit uneasy. In addition, I wanted to ensure that I would not have to recreate the wheel for future exhibition loan requests. Our curator introduced me to Christina Blattomley, the registrar at the Block Museum, who presented as part of this panel on Tuesday. Christina was invaluable in getting me started and advising me throughout the process. Excuse me. She shared the museum's standard guidelines and forms and collection management policy, which had already been vetted by the university's Office of General Counsel. I modified these guidelines and forms to fit the library's particular needs for this loan and made sure that these changes were fine with the Office of General Counsel. I also determined definitively who was allowed to approve major loans by Northwestern University Library, and it is the university librarian. In the summer of 2012, as unofficial registrar for the library, I was officially charged with drafting a policies and procedures document for Northwestern's exhibition loans in general. I collaborated on the document that you see here with Tanya Grafakos, conservation librarian, who presented as part of this panel yesterday, as well as Susan Russick, our special collections conservator. This document is for library internal reference only, and I'll show you the much more stripped down information that will be presented publicly in a few slides. In addition to working from the Block Museum's documents, we consulted publicly available policies and procedures documents and forms of other institutions with collections comparable to ours. Tanya, Susan, and I wrote the document. You see the table of contents here. And Susan created a workflow chart, which I'll show you in a little bit. As you can see, this is a long and very detailed document. This really, I should say, overwhelmed our curators the first time they saw it. But once we were able to talk with them about it and explain everything to them, they were actually very pleased that we did this, and they've been very happy with it since then. Keep in mind, though, this is only a draft. We started working on this just about a year and a half ago, and it's still an evolving process for Northwestern Library. But the purpose of the amount of detail that we put into this was to set up a comprehensive framework for our policies and procedures for major exhibition loans in general. So like I said, this covers everything from loans of special collections materials, which might be things like oil paintings, or I think a few of the things Tanya mentioned yesterday were a wine bottle and other things, scrapbooks, etc., that people might have in their special collections. All the way down to your sort of standard book and paper items for loan. In this document, we tried to account for any possible scenario, but we're aware that things may still change or be brought to our attention that we haven't addressed yet. So you'll see in the table of contents here that we included a number of definitions, statements, and other information. What we have here first is our statements of purpose. And these include the mission statement of Northwestern University Library. That, of course, didn't require any writing. We just sort of copied and pasted. A statement regarding exhibitions. And this addresses the relation of our mission to exhibitions and the goal of the document in providing policies and guidelines for exhibition loans. Next, we have general statements regarding our outgoing loans. And these cover generic allowances and limits. We've determined that Northwestern University Library may lend items from its collections to professionally managed museums and institutions within the United States and abroad. The collections are not lent for study or classroom purposes, except in special cases where allowed by the curator, and not for purposes of decor. We included a provision that a collection item will not be loaned if, in the opinion of the curator, and in consultation with preservation, the loan presents a hazard to the object. So you'll find in this document, in my description of it, that the curator and preservation really have the most of the power in determining what goes in, what goes out, and how that happens. And then, of course, the registrar coordinates all of these activities. Next, we have ethical guidelines, and these demonstrate our responsibility to the collections in alignment with the library's mission. Our concern for discretion and confidentiality on the part of individuals associated with the library and the university as its public representatives, remarks on conflicts of interest, and statements on the ongoing provenance research for items in our collections, as well as our full compliance with legal obligations related to NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property, and the UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property, the UNIDROIT Convention on Stolen or Illegally Exported Cultural Objects, and the recommendations by the International Council of Museums for the resolution of disputes regarding movable cultural property, should any of these become an immediate concern. In this project and another project, provenance research related project that I've been involved in at Northwestern, I've learned quite a bit about all of these. It's been very interesting. The next section we have here is definitions and abbreviations. Oops, excuse me. There we go. The section on definitions and abbreviations is provided to make the roles and functions of all of the players and parts in the loan process explicit. These include everything from appraisal to facilities reports, which Tanya talked about yesterday, to pro forma invoices, which Tanya also talked a bit about, to what goes into the travel document file and checklist that accompanies every object leaving the library for exhibition loan. Next, we have procedures and personnel and responsibilities. I'll cover the procedures a little bit later on when I talk about the workflow. In personnel and responsibilities, you can see there are a lot of people necessarily involved in this process from the library's point of view. Everyone from the borrower to the special library's curators, the registrar, preservation department, associate university librarian for special libraries, the university librarian, Northwestern University Office of General Counsel, and Northwestern University Office of Risk Management. Each of these individuals or departments has a very specific role to play in the entire process. Following these, we have a few appendices. The first is the outgoing loan workflow, which I'll go over more specifically in a little bit. Next are sample forms, and I'll show these to you as well following a tour of the workflow. Finally then is Appendix C, containing the loan guidelines and application. We'll actually be looking at this next, since this is really where the process starts. But before that, I just wanted to mention that the next step in our process, after having written this document, has been to gain approval from library administration. So Tanya, Susan, and I presented this document to library administration, and as I mentioned earlier, the special libraries department heads had a number of comments and especially concerns when we presented this document which Tanya and I were able to address and to allay. And like I said, in the end, they've been very pleased with the extent of the work that we put into this document. While the document and the policies and procedures are still in sort of a draft or beta status, we have been using portions of the guidelines very successfully. So next I'd like to show you how this all works. We'll take a look at the loan application, the workflow, and the other forms and paperwork. First, the loan application. Again, the policies and procedures document I've just shown you is for the library's internal reference only. When we get final approval, only information contained in this slide will be posted publicly for potential borrowers' use. The library may contribute to non-Northwestern exhibitions if they meet the following criteria. 1, the material's condition is not jeopardized. 2, the exhibition makes a major contribution to a scholarly field of study. And 3, the absence of the loaned material does not adversely impact teaching and research at Northwestern University. So if you read over this, you'll see how we actually go about starting this process. To begin, the library must receive a formal letter of request to borrow objects from the collections. This letter serves as the borrower's application, and it should include the following items in this list and be accompanied by the documents as well as information and a loan fee. The loan fee was a little bit of a touchy subject in some ways, and I can talk a little bit more about this later if people are interested and if you'd like to ask me about it. But essentially, the fee may vary, we decided, depending on the institution who's requesting the loan, excuse me, or the number of items borrowed. So that's the reason at the end of the list that we ask the borrower to please contact the registrar for more information rather than listing a menu of prices. This fee is assessed to cover administrative and incidental costs. Any additional charges for appraisal, conservation work, or anything outside of the agreed upon costs will be invoiced to the borrower. As Christina and Tanya both mentioned, the primary financial responsibility for the loan is on the borrower. In most cases, if a loan is canceled, they are required to reimburse charges incurred up to the date of the cancellation. One thing that's not included on this slide is a timeline. So especially because of the need to coordinate with such a large variety of departments and outside resources, both on campus and off, maybe here and overseas, we ask for a minimum of 12 months from the receipt of the formal letter to process a loan. If then the loan is approved by the curator and our university librarian, our loan agreement is issued by the registrar for the appropriate signatures at the borrowing institution. The museum or library's director is often responsible for this, as is the case with Northwestern University Library. It is library policy at Northwestern to use our loan agreement as the sole binding contract for outgoing loans. Often, and I think Christina mentioned this on Tuesday, often a borrower will submit their own borrowing agreement to you when requesting an item for exhibition. And it's up to the individual institution to decide if they want to go ahead and use that document or if they'd prefer to use an internal document, which is the way that we decided to go. Now, all of this then is coordinated by the registrar. So what does the registrar actually coordinate? There are a lot of steps in this process, and next I'm going to walk you through the workflow that we've created. Now our Special Collections Conservator, Susan, created this workflow for us so that we could summarize the process and also help us all visualize it from start to finish. So this is a 2-page document that we've got. The first part takes us up to the approval of the loan, and the second part describes what happens after the approval. So this chart was really helpful in making sure our larger document was in order, and also for us and the NUL curators, NUL, Northwestern University Library curators, to be able to visualize the entire process. So we begin with the request for the item loan, which I just talked about in relation to the previous slide. And this goes to the registrar. The registrar then provides the curator and preservation with the borrower's information and begins to compile and maintain an item file on this particular loan request. The registrar at this point also contacts risk management if necessary, estimates courier costs, as needed, and begins to coordinate the approval of the loan agreement by the librarian and the borrower. The curator then agrees or disagrees to the loaning concept, having been informed of caveats by preservation staff or being aware of them on their own. They begin to add to the item file, perhaps providing an appraisal or provenance or exhibit history for the item file. And preservation examines the object for suitability of the loan, evaluates the facilities report from all of the institutions that are going to be borrowing this item, and makes any recommendations for care and conservation and mounting of that item. And Tanya went over this in more detail yesterday. So all of these people and departments work together. Once the borrower conceptually approves the loan agreement, which we provide, providing any additional information regarding specifics such as the page opening of a book, matte color, framing specs, etc. Everything goes back to the registrar, who then negotiates conditions of the drafted loan agreement in consultation with the curator, preservation, and anyone else who might need to be involved, such as NU Legal. Once this is all approved and agreed to, in theory, the registrar provides the document, the formally approved loan agreement, to the university librarian. Once the borrower has approved the loan agreement, they return the signed document to the registrar and may provide funding for loan-related costs at this point. The registrar receives the signed loan agreement, coordinates art shippers as needed, and provides travel and courier documents as needed, as well as coordinating financial obligations. Now the art shippers, in my experience, have been people we've worked with quite often in the past, and people that the museums that we've loaned items to have been very familiar with working with as well. So it's nice to have that sort of larger framework of a working relationship with a variety of people. So the registrar then works with preservation and the curator to perform or contract conservation treatment and other details that may be necessary. Preservation provides a condition report with photo documentation, which Tanya talked about yesterday, and I'll show you the form that we use in just a little bit. Digital collections at this point may be called upon to create a digital surrogate of loaned materials for use and consultation while the while the item is on exhibit, and possibly also for publication. business and finance also, our business and finance office also gets involved at this point if there is invoicing to be done or if there are funds to be collected. Once all of this is taken care of, the university librarian approves shipping of the item and signs the pro forma invoice. Now the pro forma invoice, I'll show you in a little bit the form that we use, but this is, excuse me, not really what you'd think of as an invoice in terms of an exchange of funds. Really, it's just a piece of paper to document the item that's traveling. At this point, once we've got everything set, the registrar coordinates shipping and travel with the borrower and any other concerns as needed. The borrower, for their part, receives the loaned object and examines the condition. If the library has determined that a courier is necessary for the loan of this item, then the courier would be doing the condition report on departure as well as on arrival, and then again on departure and again on arrival, as Tanya explained yesterday. The borrower then is responsible for returning the loaned items and alerting the registrar immediately of any concerns. If there's any sort of damage to the item or anything else that they think we might need to be aware of, it's their responsibility to alert us immediately. So as I mentioned, if needed, a courier will accompany the object during travel to supervise shipping, installation, and deinstallation at the exhibition, and also alerts the registrar of any concerns. So Tanya talked a bit about this yesterday. Finally, when the object is returned, preservation again examines the object, and then the registrar completes the loan process, confirming that the item has been returned in satisfactory condition, ensuring that all financial and other conditions of the loan have been completed, and making sure that the item file is complete with all up-to-date information. So next I'd like to show you some samples of our loan forms and sort of walk you through their basic contents. The first one I'll show you is our outgoing loan agreement form. And this is the form that's signed by the borrower, then by university librarian, and serves as our binding legal contract for outgoing loans. So you can see here that we have the borrower's contact information, the object information, including artist or maker, biographical information, title or name of the item, the date, medium and support, if relevant, value, dimensions, and a credit line. You'll see that I also have included a small image of the item. And this is really, as Tanya mentioned yesterday, this is really good practice to provide a photograph of the item when you're also providing a verbal description, especially if two items in the loan are similar, as may be the case with books, and if the item is traveling to a country where the primary language spoken is not English. We've also included here the recommendations for environment and display conditions, which came from our preservation department, and you'll see that these are standard. Both Christina and Tanya talked a bit about these the other day. We also have here our shipping requirements. We did require a courier for unpacking, condition reporting, and installation, and required that shipping was via a fine arts shipper. Now following this, I'm not going to go over all of this legal information and these legal statements in detail, but essentially what this does is covers any eventuality that we can possibly think of in terms of conditions governing the loan for sort of official adherence to that. Care and preservation of the objects that are loaned from our collection. Packing and transportation, again, requirements for these. Insurance, and we do, you know, it's pretty standard to require that the borrower have an all-risk wall-to-wall policy. We also have a statement on indemnification, which means that the borrower shall defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the library, the university, its trustees, officers, etc., from and against any damages, claims, demands, etc., and all liability imposed by law resulting from any negligent or wrongful acts or omissions of the borrower, its employees, agents, or subcontractors. So a lot of this is legal protection for the lender in terms of the care and treatment and environmental conditions surrounding the object or the item that's being loaned, as well as stipulations for reproduction and credit, costs, cancellations, excuse me, and any additional conditions for international loans. So you'll see this is a very detailed form. The next form that I'll show you is our outgoing object condition report. And I won't go into great detail here. Tanya talked a bit about this yesterday. But what you see here is actually we have a photograph here, of course. And this is a selection of works on paper that we loaned for an exhibition at Schönkunsthalle in Frankfurt. That's on loan currently. So you'll see we have a verbal description as well as the photograph, and a very detailed verbal description of this here. This is quite a long form because there's a lot to cover. We also include on here preservation's recommendations for housing and packing, environment and display conditions, and notes regarding the current condition of the item. The last portion of this form provides for that process that Tanya talked about yesterday, where the item is examined when it leaves the library, which is what you just saw. And then we have here condition summary of object upon arrival at venue 1, departure from venue 1, arrival at venue 2, departure at venue 2, etc. And this can go on infinitely, however many venues you have. Hopefully not more than 3. The next form that I'll show you is the pro forma invoice. And as I mentioned, this is a brief document sent by the library to the borrower with the item being loaned. It records the item shipped, excuse me, and other important information for customs purposes and importation. No demand or request for payment is included. And again, of course, we have not just the verbal description, but also a photograph. And again, here, this is where the university librarian signs to allow for the travel and loan of this object. Of course, we have a reiteration then of all of our legal terms and conditions governing the loan on the back of this. And all of these forms then become part of the travel documents that accompany the item and that the courier, if we have assigned a courier, takes with him or her. And finally, we do have an invoice just in case there do happen to be additional charges, such as conservation work required. And I mentioned these a little bit earlier. So this is the form, more what you're used to thinking of when you hear the word invoice. And it's used to request payment for any type of charge incurred by the library that, under loan agreement contract, the borrower or other party is responsible for. So those are all the forms and paperwork that we have involved in our loan exhibition process here. And you can see it's quite a lot of work, which is why we require such a long amount of time to process these types of loans. This has been a really wonderful process to be a part of and to learn from as I've been going. And I'd like to share a few things that I've learned with you from a library perspective, or really from any perspective in general. And I've listed these here. It's really important to be thorough and to be clear, not just in terms of planning, but also in terms of your documentation. Be in communication with your curators, with your legal counsel, with your administrators, with the borrower, with your fine arts shippers, with anybody that might be involved in the process at all relevant steps. There are so many things, especially if you're working with someone overseas, that could get lost and dropped, that it's really important to stay on top of those things. Also, it's important to be patient. These things tend to move very slowly, even if you're corresponding by email overseas. It takes a while. There are just as many people involved on the borrower's end as there are on the lender's end in terms of determining planning for the exhibition, legal requirements, all these other things. So it's important to be patient through this process as well. It can take quite a while. Also, this is another good reason to be very thorough in terms of your documentation, because I've had things come in and then I don't hear from anyone for several months, and I've got to go back then a few months later and try to recreate what happened. So it's really good to try to keep all of that in order. And finally, be flexible. This is really important as well, because you will always get a curveball when you least expect one. Venue changes, exhibit item changes, anything in between. So just a few of the things that I would recommend keeping in mind if you're planning on starting some type of loan program like this one. Then finally, I want to share a few resources with you that I found useful. And Christina and Tanya mentioned a few of these, but I just want to reiterate those and add a couple. I found all of these very useful, and you'll be able to link to these from the slides later on. But the NEDCC's Guide to to protecting paper and book collections during exhibition that Tanya mentioned yesterday is very helpful for that. I also found the ACRL RBMS guidelines for for interlibrary and exhibition loan of special collections materials particularly helpful. And that is published here. It's really the industry standard, to use that term, for guidelines on loans of special collections materials to libraries and museums. Then the American Alliance of Museums standards regarding collection stewardship. There are a good number of recommendations in here. And as the library loans items to the museums as well as other libraries, we needed to be aware of and in compliance with, at least as much as possible, the industry standards for the museum world as well. And then finally, I'd also like to recommend the Registrar's Committee of the American Alliance of Museums Forms and Policies sample documents. And the documents that are listed here include a standard facility report. So if you don't have one of those, you can work from theirs. This link will actually take you to their form and policy swap page, which can be really helpful. So I'd like to thank you again, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
You mentioned the loan fee would be variable depending on how many items are requested and on the type of institution. So what factors do you consider when considering the type of institution?
That's a good question. The factors that we might consider are the size of the institution, the nonprofit status or educational status of the institution, also depending on the number of items they're borrowing. If they're borrowing just one, we might have a very different fee structure from if they're borrowing 20 items. So it can really vary, and it varies from institution to institution as well.
Does it also have anything to do with the type of material being borrowed, whether it's a painting versus a book?
That's a good question. It might have to do with that, and that would really be the call of the curators in consultation with preservation.
Okay. Do borrowers ever arrange for conservation treatment? And if so, would the lender need to compensate the borrowing institution?
That's a good question too. The borrower can arrange for conservation, but they would have to be in close consultation with our conservation unit. In our loan agreement, it stipulates that all of the conservation work that's done on any of these items must be done by Northwestern University Library conservators or by someone that they authorize. So it's possible that they might want to, that the borrower might want to suggest something like that, but really it's up to the library as the owner of that item to determine whether that's permissible.
Okay, is the registrar a distinct position, or is it the responsibility of someone with other responsibilities?
Yes. It depends where you are. Here, the registrar position is those responsibilities are folded into the responsibilities of another position, of the administrative assistant for special libraries, which is my former position. At the Block Museum, you'll note that Christina is the senior registrar there, so it is a separate position there. It just depends on the number of loan requests you get, the amount of loaning that you do. So for the library, it's not as great, and not as great a portion of the time that's spent as it would be at a museum like the Block Museum. Oh, and thank you, Katie, for pointing that out. Yes, some libraries like NYPL do have registrars. So certainly they have a lot more items and a lot more things and a lot more responsibility for loaning than we do here.
Where are the item files kept? Is there a central file in the administration?
Yes. There is a central file in the administration, and the conservation unit has separate files for each item as well.
How common is it to send a courier along with a loan?
Sending a courier along with a loan really varies. It varies by institution and also by collection. So the criteria for sending a courier can vary. Often it's determined by the condition of the item or by the value of the item. So something that might be in very stable condition and that might not have a very high value could be shipped independently of a curator. For something like the Ramon Casas painting that we loaned, we did have a courier for that.
And is it the responsibility of the borrowing institution to pay the fees of the courier?
It is, yes, and that's part of the loan agreement. And that's really standard.
Okay, do you go through the same process for on-campus loans? And do you charge the loan fee on campus or to on-campus entities outside the libraries?
Good question, especially because we do loan a lot of items to the Black Museum, as Christina pointed out on Tuesday. We don't go through the same loan process for on-campus loans. It's because they're part of the same institution, we don't have the same legal requirements, and we just really don't need to do that. Because we're part of the same institution. So as a result, we don't charge loan fees. And I should say, too, that the loan fee is not always charged. As I mentioned before, it's sort of assessed on a case-by-case basis.
All right, are there any other questions for Sara? Okay, looks like that's it then.
All right, well, thank you for your questions and your time.
All right. Thank you, Sara, for your reflections on Northwestern University's experience with exhibition loans. Thank you also to all of our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You'll soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help ALCTS to plan new continuing education offerings. I'd like to thank Katie Rousseau, the organizer for this online pre-conference, as well as Eva Sorrell for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support she and our colleagues on the Continuing Education Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Information about all ALCTS webinars and continuing education events can be found on the ALCTS homepage at ala.org/ALCTS. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS events in the future.